Tonight, we're going to talk about two spacecraft that left Earth decades ago and are still drifting somewhere in the darkness. Not Voyager, not the machine still whispering back from interstellar space, but Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11. Older, quieter spacecraft that went first, crossed into the outer solar system, passed giant planets, and slowly disappeared from our reach. For years, they sent signals back to Earth from farther and farther away, until their power faded and the silence became permanent. Now they continue outward, without voices, without instructions, carrying only their metal plaques, small human messages meant for any intelligence that might one day find them. They are not dead in the ordinary sense. They are still moving, but to Earth, they are gone. So tonight, the question is simple. What happens to the lonely spacecraft we left behind forever? Before we begin tonight's journey, subscribe if you want more calm space documentaries like this, leave a like if you enjoy deep space mysteries, and write in the comments where you are watching from. Tonight, you are watching the Space for Sleep channel, talking about the lonely spacecraft we left behind forever. Before Voyager became the symbol of humanity drifting into interstellar darkness, there were two smaller, older machines that went first. They were not built to become legends in the same way. They did not carry music from Earth, greetings in many languages, or the sound of waves, wind, and human voices. Their message was simpler, colder, almost more haunting because of how little it tried to say. Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 carried metal plaques, small engraved signs that showed where they came from, what their makers looked like, and how a distant finder might place them in the galaxy. They were not rich human archives. They were survival marks, a quiet proof that something on Earth had once learned to build machines and send them away. And then, one by one, the voices of those machines faded. Today, we do not speak to Pioneer 10. We do not speak to Pioneer 11. We do not receive their data, correct their paths, listen to their engineering tones, or wait for new images from the outer planets. To Earth, they are gone. But the strange thing is that gone does not mean stopped. Somewhere far beyond the comfortable map of the inner solar system, these spacecraft are still moving, silent, powerless, and unreachable, but still traveling through space as objects that once belonged to us. When they launched, the idea of sending a human-made object beyond the giant planets still felt new. The solar system beyond Mars was not the familiar place it is in modern images. Jupiter and Saturn were known worlds, but not yet worlds seen up close by traveling machines. The outer solar system was still mostly a distant region of telescopic light, math, and imagination. To send a spacecraft there was to send a small instrument into a realm no machine had crossed before. Pioneer 10 left Earth in 1972. Pioneer 11 followed in 1973. They were part of an earlier age of exploration, an age before deep space spacecraft became characters in the public imagination. They were practical, spin-stabilized, compact machines built to survive radiation, distance, cold, and uncertainty. Their mission was not to be poetic. Their mission was to gather data, test paths, and open the route outward. But sometimes the poetry comes later. At the time, their purpose was clear. Pioneer 10 would become the first mission to the outer planets, the first spacecraft to cross the asteroid belt, and the first to fly close enough to Jupiter to study it directly. Pioneer 11 would follow and go farther in a different way, visiting Jupiter and then Saturn, becoming the first spacecraft to study Saturn up close. Together, they were like early scouts sent ahead before humanity knew how far its machines could truly travel. They made the later journeys possible. Voyager did not enter an untouched road. It followed a path that Pioneer had helped prove was survivable. Before the Voyagers could become humanity's famous interstellar messengers, the Pioneers had already shown that spacecraft could cross the asteroid belt, pass through the radiation around Jupiter, and keep operating far beyond the part of space humans had known well. The pioneers went first, and because they went first, the outer planets became reachable in a new way. Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 were not designed to be immortal, and yet they became deep-time objects. Their electronics were always temporary. Their power systems would fade. Their transmitters would weaken. Their mission teams would age. The people who built them knew, at least intellectually, that one day the spacecraft would become silent. But knowing that silence is coming is different from hearing the last signal arrive. A final signal from a spacecraft is not like a death in the usual sense. It is not dramatic. It is not a visible ending. It does not come with a last image of the machine itself or a final farewell written in language. It arrives as weak radio energy across enormous distance, a faint technical trace that says the spacecraft is still alive enough to be heard. Then, one day, there is no usable signal, or only a whisper too faint to mean anything, or a final attempt that returns nothing at all. The silence becomes the ending, but only for us. For the spacecraft, if we can speak about a spacecraft this way, nothing emotional happens. It does not know it is silent. It does not know Earth is listening or no longer listening. It does not know it once passed Jupiter or Saturn or carried a plaque meant for unknown beings. It is a machine, not a mind. But human beings cannot help giving meaning to the things we send far away. We build them, name them, track them, worry about them, and remember them. When they vanish from communication, the loss feels strangely personal. This is why Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 are such powerful subjects for a calm space documentary. Their story is not loud. It does not depend on explosions, danger, or dramatic failure. It is a story about distance doing what distance always does. It stretches signals until they fade. It turns active machines into artifacts. It turns engineering into memory. It turns a mission into a ghost. That idea is quietly terrifying. A human decision made in the 20th century still has an object attached to it, moving through space long after the signal ended. The launch, the trajectory, the planetary encounter, the mission design, all of it became motion that did not stop when the mission stopped. We are used to human actions fading quickly. A word is spoken and disappears. A building is built and one day falls. A machine works and one day breaks. But a spacecraft on an escape path can carry the physical result of a human decision into time spans that make civilization look brief. The pioneers may remain recognizable as human-made objects for millions of years, not alive, not working, not protected, but present. It does not say everything we are. It cannot. It does not carry all our languages, our art, our history, our music, our mistakes, our cruelty, our tenderness, or the sound of a human life. It carries a few engraved clues: human bodies, a map of sorts, a reference to the solar system, a sign that the object came from a technological species near one star among many. It is almost painfully small compared with the planet behind it. And maybe that is what makes it beautiful. Humanity could not send itself. It could not send its oceans, forests, cities, animals, languages, grief, or joy. It could only send a symbol, a thin metal drawing attached to a machine that would one day stop speaking. The plaque is not a complete message from Earth. It is a fragment, a fossil of intention. A mission belongs to the present. It has schedules, teams, instruments, goals, updates, and results. A relic belongs to time. It is something left behind after the living connection has ended. The pioneers began as missions, but they are now relics moving away from the world that made them. And because they are moving, the word relic feels almost wrong. They are relics that are leaving. That reversal is the heart of the story. Humanity usually leaves its artifacts on Earth, buried in soil, preserved in museums, carved into stone, lost underwater, or abandoned in deserts. The pioneers are artifacts we left ahead of us instead of behind us. They are not buried in the past. They are flying into the future. If they are ever encountered, it will not be by the humanity that built them, but perhaps by something else. In an age so remote that our present world would feel ancient beyond recognition. A spacecraft can become older than the civilization that launched it. That sentence should feel strange. The pioneers may outlast the nations that funded them, the languages used in their documentation, the buildings where they were assembled, and perhaps even the memory of the people who worked on them. The metal, the structure, the silent instruments, and the plaque may continue through darkness long after nearly every human context around them has changed. Space does not preserve things perfectly, but it can preserve them in a way Earth rarely does. Cold, isolated, and removed from weather, biology, and human reuse. So when we call them lonely, we are not saying the machines feel loneliness. We left them behind, but not because we stopped caring. We left them behind because space is larger than our ability to remain connected. Their power faded, because all machines fade. Their signals weakened, because distance is merciless. Their antennas could no longer keep the relationship alive. Their missions ended, because even the best engineering cannot keep a spacecraft young forever. But the fact that we lost them does not erase what they did. Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 changed the boundary of human reach. Before them, no spacecraft had passed through some of the most uncertain regions they crossed. Before them, the giant planets were more distant in our experience, less directly measured, less familiar as worlds. They turned risk into knowledge. They transformed the outer solar system from remote objects in telescopes into places that machines could actually visit. They were not the final word. They were the first step into a larger dark. That first step matters because it carries a different emotional tone from later missions. Later spacecraft may be more advanced, more famous, more capable, and more scientifically rich. But the first machines to go into a new region carry a particular vulnerability. They go without the comfort of precedent. They face uncertainties that later missions inherit as solved problems. They are built in an era when the maps are thinner. The pioneers were exactly that kind of machine. That is easy to forget, because their story now feels like silence. But before they became lost spacecraft, they were successes. Pioneer 10 reached Jupiter and sent back the first close-up observations that changed the way scientists understood the giant planet. Pioneer 11 followed its own path and later visited Saturn, becoming the first spacecraft to see that world up close. These were not failures drifting sadly into darkness. They were successful explorers whose endings came only after they had already done far more than they were originally built to do. The sadness comes after the achievement, not instead of it. This balance is important for the video. If we treat the pioneers only as dead machines, we miss the wonder. If we treat them only as engineering victories, we miss the loneliness. The real story is both. They were triumphant and then silent. They opened the outer solar system and then vanished from communication. They carried human curiosity outward and then became unreachable artifacts. That is why they feel almost like characters. Pioneer 10 is the first one into the deep dark, the machine that crossed the asteroid belt and met Jupiter before any other spacecraft. Pioneer 11 is the sibling that followed, curved past Jupiter and went on to Saturn, seeing another giant world before disappearing into its own direction. Their roots separated, their voices ended at different times. Their future paths point toward different parts of the sky, but emotionally, they belong together. Two early messengers, two silent machines, two plaques leaving Earth behind. The first chapter should leave us with that image, not yet the full, detailed life of Pioneer 10, Not yet the Saturn encounter of Pioneer 11. Not yet the final signals, but the larger realization that before humanity's most famous interstellar messages, there were these earlier, quieter machines. They were sent outward at a time when the outer solar system still felt like a more uncertain frontier. They proved the path, carried a message, and became silent. Somewhere out there, they are still moving, not shining, not speaking, not waiting, just moving. That is the calm terror of their story. They no longer need us. They no longer answer us. They no longer know, if a machine can ever know, that Earth exists. But they remain connected to us by origin. Their metal was shaped here. Their path began here. Their plaque speaks for a species that may never meet its reader. They are pieces of Earth that escaped Earth forever. And to understand why that matters, we have to begin with the first one that entered the dark. Pioneer 10 did not leave Earth as a famous ghost. It left as a test of courage and engineering, a small machine launched into a part of the solar system that no spacecraft had ever crossed. Today, when we think of the outer planets, we have decades of images behind us. Jupiter is not only a bright point in the night sky anymore. We have seen its storms, its bands, its moons, its shadows, its auroras, and the strange violence of its magnetic environment. But before all of that became familiar, someone had to send a machine toward it for the first time and accept that the machine might not survive. That machine was Pioneer 10. It launched from Earth in 1972, carrying instruments, antennas, power, and a simple plaque meant to speak for humanity long after the spacecraft could no longer speak for itself. Its mission seemed almost impossible from the emotional distance of the time. It had to travel beyond Mars, cross the asteroid belt, reach Jupiter, survive the enormous radiation environment around the giant planet, send back data across hundreds of millions of kilometers, and continue outward if it lived long enough. This is one of the reasons Pioneer 10 feels so important. It did not only explore Jupiter, it proved that the road to Jupiter could be traveled. There is a difference between knowing a place exists and knowing that a machine from Earth can reach it. Jupiter had been seen for centuries. Its 4 largest moons had been known since Galileo turned his telescope toward it. The planet was a giant presence in astronomy long before spaceflight. But until Pioneer 10, Jupiter remained distant in the old way, studied by light, mathematics, and imagination, but not by a spacecraft passing close enough to feel its environment. Pioneer 10 changed that. It turned Jupiter from a world watched across space into a world visited by a machine. The spacecraft was not large by the standards of the planets it approached. It was tiny, fragile, and slow only when compared with cosmic distances, but fast compared with anything humans had sent that far. It spun to keep itself stable, carried a high-gain antenna to send data home, and depended on nuclear power because sunlight grows weak so far from the sun. It was built for a mission that was supposed to last only a limited time, but its path carried it into a future far longer than its designers could ever control. This gives the Jupiter encounter a deeper meaning. Pioneer 10 was not only approaching a planet, it was approaching the moment that would help make it a wanderer forever. As the spacecraft traveled outward, Earth fell farther behind. Signals took longer to travel. Commands became slower. The sun grew smaller in the spacecraft's sky. The inner solar system, where all human life had ever existed, became a region behind it. Pioneer 10 did not know any of this. It was not conscious, not lonely, not afraid. But from Earth, every kilometer changed the emotional scale of the mission. We had built something small enough to fit inside a rocket fairing, and now it was moving toward the largest planet in the solar system. Jupiter is not just another stop. The images it returned would look modest compared with later missions, but their importance was not modest. They were the first close views, the first spacecraft measurements from that realm, the first direct taste of Jupiter by a human-made object. The planet was no longer only a bright wandering star in the sky or a disk in a telescope. It had been approached, it had been measured, it had been crossed by the path of a machine made on Earth. That is a quiet revolution. This is why its story has to begin before the sadness. If we only remember the silence, we forget the bravery of the attempt. Pioneer 10 was not a failed machine drifting away. It was a successful explorer that became silent after exceeding its own original life. It transformed risk into knowledge. It took a path no spacecraft had taken and returned evidence that the path was real. The loneliness comes because success does not prevent loss. A machine can complete its mission and still drift beyond reach. It gave us Jupiter, then left. Not immediately, not emotionally, not by choice, but physically. Its path continued outward after the flyby. Jupiter had accelerated it onto a route that would carry it away from the Sun. The spacecraft that entered the outer solar system as an active explorer slowly became something else, a departing artifact. Still able to speak for years, still sending data from far away, but already on a road that no mission command could reverse. There is something almost mythic about that, but the facts are mechanical. A rocket launches. A spacecraft follows a trajectory. Gravity bends the path. Instruments measure. Signals return. Power fades. The transmitter weakens. The distance grows. Eventually, communication ends. Nothing supernatural happens. No dramatic boundary is crossed where the machine becomes a ghost. The ghostly feeling is created by our awareness of time and distance. That combination creates the emotion. That relationship matters. As long as a signal returns, distance feels incomplete. The spacecraft is far away, but not fully lost. It can be placed on a map. Its status can be checked. Its carrier tone can be searched for. Its existence remains active in the human present. The people on Earth may not see it, but they can still know it through the signal. That thin radio link becomes a kind of lifeline. Pioneer 10 kept that lifeline for decades. Then, the lifeline became too weak. Its last faint signal reached Earth in January 2003, from billions of miles away. The number is enormous, but the emotional meaning is simple. By then, Pioneer 10 was so far from the world that made it, and so low on power that even the act of being heard had become difficult. A final weak signal from a spacecraft is not a farewell in the human sense. It does not say goodbye. It does not explain itself. It is just radio energy, barely enough to confirm that something out there still exists. Then, there is no more usable voice. That simplicity can feel more lonely than a richer archive. The plaque does not try to make aliens understand humanity emotionally. It does not ask them to love us, pity us, fear us, or know our stories. It only says, in a cold and careful way, this object was made by beings like this, from a place like this, around a star located here. It reduces all of Earth to a few engraved lines. That reduction is heartbreaking, because no message could ever be enough. How could one plaque carry a planet? It cannot. And yet, it carries something. It carries the fact that we want it to be known. Even if the chance of discovery is almost unimaginably small, someone chose to attach a message to the spacecraft. Someone looked at a machine leaving the solar system and understood that once it was gone, it might become one of the longest-lasting human artifacts. If anything ever found it, the spacecraft should not be completely anonymous. That act turns Pioneer 10 into more than an explorer. It becomes a bottle in a cosmic ocean. Still, the message is there. That matters because the message may be more for us than for anyone else. It shows that even when humanity knew the odds were impossible, it could not resist turning exploration into communication. We did not only want to measure Jupiter, we wanted in some tiny way to leave evidence of ourselves, to send not only instruments, but identity, to say that the machine did not arise from nowhere. It came from a world with makers. That is why Pioneer 10 feels like the first one into the dark, in more than a physical sense. It crossed the asteroid belt first, reached Jupiter first, and began the long tradition of human-made objects escaping the solar system. But emotionally, it also crossed a boundary between exploration and abandonment. It went beyond the region where a machine can remain comfortably part of Earth's active world. It became an object whose future is almost entirely without us. This future is difficult to imagine because it is too long. Pioneer 10 is heading generally toward the star Aldebaran, but not in a way that makes a meeting feel close. The timescale is millions of years. Human civilization is only a thin moment compared with that. The spacecraft may still be moving when the languages that named it are gone. It may still carry its plaque when every person who ever heard its signal has been dead for incomprehensible spans of time. A machine can become a fossil before it is ever found. That is what Pioneer 10 is becoming. Not a fossil buried in rock, but a technological fossil moving through darkness. It preserves an early stage of human spaceflight. Our instruments, our materials, our assumptions, our confidence, our simple way of saying who we are. If someone ever found it, they would not find humanity as it is now, or as it may be then. They would find a version of humanity from the early space age, a species just beginning to send machines past the giant planets. The plaque would not show our future. It would show our beginning. This thought gives Pioneer 10 a strange kind of dignity. It is old technology now, but deep time may make old technology powerful. A simple spacecraft from 1972 may one day represent an entire era, not because it was the most advanced object humanity ever built, but because it was one of the first to leave. First objects carry the marks of origin. They are imperfect, limited, and brave. Pioneer 10 is like that. It is not sleek by modern imagination. It is not a living spacecraft anymore. It has no continuing mission in the active sense, but it has a path, and that path is irreversible. The machine is still somewhere out there, silently fulfilling the final consequence of its launch. That is the part that stays with the mind. Somewhere, not as metaphor, but physically, Pioneer 10 exists. It is not on a screen. It is not in a museum. It is not preserved behind glass. It is not waiting on a launch pad or orbiting Earth where astronauts might one day reach it. It is far away, beyond contact, moving through a darkness no human eye can see directly. The object is real, but unreachable. Its silence is not symbolic. It is radio silence across space. And yet that silence does not erase the mission. If anything, it makes the mission feel more complete. The point of Pioneer 10 was never to come back. It was never to remain close. It was built to go outward, to test the frontier, to gather what it could, and to continue along the path physics gave it. Its silence is sad, because we are human, but its departure is also the fulfillment of the kind of object it became. A spacecraft on an escape path is a goodbye built in metal. Pioneer 10 taught us that the outer solar system could be reached. Then it taught us that some journeys do not return. The first lesson changed science. The second changes the heart. And after Pioneer 10 had opened the road past the asteroid belt and Jupiter, another machine would follow it outward, carrying the same kind of message, but toward a different giant planet and a different kind of silence. Pioneer 11 began as a sibling, but not as a copy in the emotional sense. It carried the same basic family of design, the same kind of plaque, the same early deep space confidence, and the same human willingness to send a machine farther than any machine had safely gone before. But its path would become its own story. Pioneer 10 had been the first one into the outer darkness, the one that proved the road to Jupiter was possible. Pioneer 11 would take that opened road and bend it towards something even farther, colder, and more mysterious from Earth. Saturn. Before spacecraft reached Saturn, the planet was already one of the most beautiful objects in human astronomy. Even small telescopes could reveal that it was different. A golden world wrapped in rings, floating in the night like a symbol more than a planet. For centuries, Saturn had carried a strange emotional power because it looked designed to be wondered at. But through Earth-bound telescopes, it remained remote. The rings were visible, but not intimate. Titan was known but not explored. The planet was familiar as an image and still almost untouched as a place. Pioneer 11 would become the first spacecraft to change that. This gives Pioneer 11 a different character. Pioneer 10 feels like the first step into the dark. Pioneer 11 feels like the step that says, "Father, it is not enough to reach one giant planet. It is not enough to prove one road. If the solar system is a system of worlds, then a successful first crossing invites the next crossing." Pioneer 11 carried that logic outward. It went to Jupiter, survived, gathered data, and then continued towards Saturn, becoming a bridge between the first Jupiter encounter and the more ambitious age of outer planet exploration that would follow. In a way, Pioneer 11 is the less famous but more quietly dramatic sibling. Pioneer 10 entered the history books as the first spacecraft to fly by Jupiter, and later as one of the first human objects set loose on a path out of the solar system. Voyager became the famous voice from beyond the planets. Pioneer 11 stands between them, overshadowed and yet essential. It was not first into deep space in the same way, and it did not keep speaking as long as Voyager, but it was the first to bring Saturn close. That should not feel small. The difference is difficult to explain because the planet itself did not change. Saturn was already Saturn. Its rings were already there. Titan had already moved around it for ages. The cold sunlight, the icy particles, the gravity, the storms, the distant moons, all of it existed before our spacecraft arrived. But human knowledge changes the emotional meaning of a place. Once a machine has flown past, a planet becomes part of the traveled universe, not only the observed one. Pioneer 11 made Saturn part of the traveled universe. It passed the planet in 1979, the same year Voyager 1 reached Jupiter, and the age of more detailed outer planet imaging was beginning to unfold. Pioneer 11's Saturn images and measurements may now look simple beside later spacecraft, but they were the opening touch. It saw the ringed planet close enough to give mission planners and scientists direct experience with a place that had previously been approached only by light. That first touch mattered for the future. It helped prepare the way for the Voyager encounters with Saturn, and much later, for the deep, patient exploration of Cassini. The later missions would give us the Saturn that now lives in public imagination. The stormy North Pole, the moon Titan beneath haze, Enceladus spraying water into space, the delicate ring structure, the long orbital dance of moons and ice. But before all that, Pioneer 11 crossed the threshold. It showed that a spacecraft could reach Saturn and continue. This is the role of an early scout. Pioneer 11's journey also deepens the feeling of the two pioneers as companions who separate. They begin as sister missions, similar in design and purpose, both carrying plaques, both moving outward through the giant planet region, both extending human presence beyond what had been done before. But their paths are not the same. Pioneer 10 meets Jupiter and continues outward on one route. Pioneer 11 uses Jupiter to reach Saturn, and then leaves on another. They become two lines drawn away from Earth. The Saturn encounter gives Pioneer 11 a kind of melancholy brightness before the darkness. There is something powerful about imagining a small spacecraft passing the ringed planet, collecting data, sending it back to Earth, and then continuing away. It did not stay. It could not stay. It was not built to become a permanent observer. It was a passing witness, a messenger that saw Saturn and then left the planet behind forever. That is one of the recurring emotional patterns of flyby missions. They arrive after years of travel. They pass their target in hours or days. This is very different from an orbiter. An orbiter stays and turns a planet into a long study. A flyby turns a planet into a memory. Pioneer 11 gave humanity a first memory of Saturn from close range. And then it became a memory itself. It had seen two giants, Jupiter first, then Saturn. Pioneer 11 did not last forever, but it lasted long enough to become part of deep space history. By the mid-1990s, its power had faded severely. The instruments that once studied the outer solar system could not continue forever. Its radio voice weakened, and the geometry of the spacecraft's antenna and Earth's motion eventually made communication impossible. The end did not come as a cinematic destruction. It came as distance, aging, and orientation. A spacecraft does not have to explode to be lost. Sometimes it is lost because it can no longer face home. That detail is quietly devastating. A machine built to speak to Earth can become silent simply because Earth moves out of the view of its antenna, and the spacecraft can no longer be maneuvered to point back. The relationship depends on alignment. A planet, a spacecraft, an antenna, a transmitter, a receiver, and enough power to bridge the dark. When one part fails or drifts beyond correction, the conversation ends. For Pioneer 11, the mission ended in 1995. There was a last contact, then only a brief later return of engineering data, and then nothing stable enough to continue the relationship. It had become a ghost ship, still on a trajectory out of the solar system, but no longer part of the daily world of mission operations. Its path remained. Its plaque remained. Its body remained somewhere in the dark, but its voice was gone. In the shadow of Pioneer 10's first crossing, in the shadow of Voyager's golden record and interstellar fame, in the shadow of Cassini's long Saturn masterpiece, and yet, without Pioneer 11, the story of Saturn exploration is incomplete. It was the first machine to cross that threshold, the first close visitor to the ringed planet, the first spacecraft to turn Saturn from distant elegance into a place touched by human instruments. That firstness remains, even if later missions made the planet far more vivid. There is a special kind of sadness in being first and then forgotten. The pioneers both carry that feeling, but Pioneer 11 perhaps carries it more deeply. It was not only a twin of Pioneer 10, it was the first witness to Saturn. It took a human-made object into one of the most beautiful places in the solar system, and then continued into silence. If Pioneer 10 is the machine that opened the road to Jupiter and beyond, Pioneer 11 is the machine that gave Saturn its first human visitor and then vanished from contact. That is why its story deserves to be told slowly, not as a footnote. For Saturn, Pioneer 11 was nothing, a tiny visitor, silent except for the radiation it emitted and reflected, passing for a moment through a system billions of years old. For humanity, it was a revolution. That difference in scale is part of the beauty of space exploration. The universe does not stop when we arrive. The planet does not care that our machine is first, but we care, because firstness marks the expansion of human understanding. The universe is indifferent. The explorers are not. And even when the Explorer is a machine, the care comes from us. We care that Pioneer 11 reached Saturn because it means human curiosity reached Saturn. We care that it carried a plaque because it means someone imagined a future finder beyond the human world. We care that it fell silent because the signal was the last thread tying that object to its makers. The spacecraft itself has no feelings, but it becomes a vessel for ours. This is why deep space machines become characters. Not because they are alive, because their journeys resemble human emotions at cosmic scale, leaving, searching, witnessing, fading, and becoming unreachable. That is what makes these spacecraft so haunting. The human story ends before the physical object does. A person dies, and the body remains for a time. A civilization fades, and ruins remain. A spacecraft falls silent, and the machine continues. Pioneer 11 is still out there, not in the way a mission is out there, but in the way a relic is out there. Its future is no longer written in mission updates. It is written in trajectory, inertia, distance, and deep time. It may never pass close to another world. It may never be found. It may never again interact with anything that can recognize it. But it is still a human artifact moving away from the sun. This thought makes the Saturn encounter feel almost like the last bright room before a long corridor. Pioneer 11 saw the ringed planet, gave its report, and then entered a future without planetary drama. For years it continued to speak, but the great encounter was behind it. Every year, after Saturn carried it farther from the part of its story that humans could easily celebrate. Eventually, only the fading signal remained. Then, even that ended. What remains now is the path. A path toward the outer darkness, away from the world that built it, carrying the plaque and the memory of a mission that began in the early space age. Pioneer 11 is no longer a source of new discoveries, but it is itself a discovery about us. It shows that humans send machines not only to gather facts, but to extend presence. We place metal beyond our reach and let it represent a moment of our species. There is something vulnerable about that. The plaque on Pioneer 11 is not armor. It does not protect the spacecraft. It does not guarantee meaning. It does not make discovery likely. It is only a sign, an engraving on a machine that cannot explain itself. If something ever finds it, the plaque will have to speak without context. It will have to carry the burden of being a message from a species that may no longer be nearby in any recognizable sense. This is the same burden Pioneer 10 carries, but Pioneer 11 carries it with Saturn behind it. That makes its silence feel ringed by memory. A machine from Earth past the planet of rings, then became a message in the dark. And as we follow that message farther from the planets, the next thing to understand is the small metal plaque that both spacecraft carry and why a message no one may ever read can still matter. The Pioneer plaque is not large, not beautiful in the ordinary sense, and not full of the warmth people often imagine when they think of a message from Earth. It is not music. It is not a voice. It is not a letter written in any human language. It does not say hello in English, or Russian, or Chinese, or Arabic, or Hungarian, or any of the thousands of languages that have carried human life across history. It does not contain the sound of rain, the cry of a newborn child, the noise of a city, the rhythm of waves, or the silence of a forest at night. Compared with the Voyager Golden Record, it feels almost bare, and that bareness is what makes it haunting. The plaque is a metal engraving, a small diagram attached to a spacecraft that was already destined to leave the world that made it. It shows human figures. It shows the spacecraft's origin in the solar system. It uses the positions of pulsars as a kind of galactic address. It tries, with almost painfully few lines, to say that this object was made by beings from a small planet around one star. It is less like a conversation and more like a marker placed at the edge of an impossible wilderness. That may be the real message. Not every detail of who we are, but the fact that we wanted to be known at all. When Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 left Earth, humanity attached a small sign to each of them because someone imagined a future beyond us. Not a near future. Not even a future in which the spacecraft still worked. A future so distant that the machines might be silent, cold, and ancient beyond anything we can comfortably picture. The plaque was created for an almost impossible reader. Not another nation, not another generation, not a scientist with a receiver, but something unknown, somewhere far from Earth, perhaps millions of years from now. That is why the plaque feels both hopeful and almost absurd. The odds of it ever being found are unimaginably small. Interstellar space is vast in a way that makes even the word vast feel weak. Stars are separated by distances so large that a spacecraft can travel for millions of years without passing near anything that could notice it. A small probe drifting through that darkness is not like a bottle floating across a small sea. It is more like a grain of dust released into an ocean larger than all human geography. It is a monument that does not stay. The human figures engraved on the plaque are perhaps the most direct part of the message. They say, roughly, this is what the makers looked like. Not perfectly, not completely. Not as culture, personality, emotion, or life, but as bodies. A male figure and a female figure. Simplified and exposed, placed beside the outline of the spacecraft for scale. The image has been discussed, criticized, defended, and interpreted in many ways, but emotionally, its purpose is simple: to attach the object to bodies like ours. The plaque says the machine came from living makers. That matters because a spacecraft alone could be mistaken for something purely mechanical, a stray object of unknown function. The figures remind a potential finder that behind the metal was biology. Behind the antenna and structure was a planet where life became capable of building. The plaque turns engineering into evidence of beings. Of course, a distant intelligence might not understand human bodies at all. They might not recognize the figures as alive. They might not see the raised hand as a greeting. They might not know whether the shapes are the makers, symbols, warnings, or decorative marks. We imagine the plaque as a message because we designed it that way. But there is no guarantee that a truly alien mind would read it the way we hope. That uncertainty makes it even more fragile. And the Pioneer plaque may never be understood, even if it is found. The same lines that feel clear to us may be confusing to something that evolved under another star, with different senses, different bodies, different symbols, and a different path to intelligence. We often imagine mathematics and diagrams as universal, and perhaps they are more universal than words. But even a diagram requires assumptions. It requires the reader to separate symbol from object, scale from representation, map from reality. The plaque is a bridge built before we know whether anyone on the other side uses bridges. In simple terms, the plaque is trying to say, "We came from here." That is almost unbearably poetic, even though the design is technical. Again, the plaque depends on a reader who can think across symbols. That reader may never exist. But if it does, the plaque becomes a tiny miracle of delayed communication. Imagine for a moment that something finds Pioneer 10 or Pioneer 11 far in the future. Not soon. Not in any human lifetime. Far beyond the age of the people who built them. Perhaps beyond the age of the civilizations that remember them. The machine is silent. Its instruments are dead. Its surface is old. It carries no active voice. But there, attached to it, is a diagram, a set of clues. A message from a species that may be long changed or gone. That is what makes the plaque so emotionally powerful. It is not really first contact, in the active sense. It is not a handshake across the stars. It is not conversation. It is archaeology before the ruin has even been found. We made an artifact and sent it away, knowing that if it ever speaks, it will speak long after our direct voice has ended. The plaque is a future fossil of humanity. Buildings fall, documents decay, digital storage fails, languages change, political borders vanish. Even monuments can be buried, broken, or reinterpreted. But a spacecraft far from planets may drift in cold darkness for timescales that make human preservation seem fragile. The plaque is not safe forever, but it has a kind of cosmic isolation that many Earth artifacts do not. It is not exposed to rain, roots, earthquakes, oceans, or daily human destruction. It is exposed to time in another form, and endurance is part of its meaning. The people who designed the plaque were not sending a message to tomorrow. They were sending a message into a future almost too large to imagine. That is why the plaque feels different from a normal communication. A normal message expects a response. A letter expects a reader. A radio call expects another receiver. The Pioneer plaque expects almost nothing. It is an act of communication without expectation. And signatures can be powerful. A signature does not explain the whole life of the person who writes it. It does not contain their memories, flaws, dreams, or fears. But it says they existed. It says they made a mark. It connects presence to identity. The Pioneer plaque is humanity's early signature on the edge of the solar system. Not written on paper, written in metal, carried by silence. This makes the plaque feel almost heavier now that the spacecraft no longer speak. While Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 were active, the plaque was not their only voice. They had radio signals, instruments, telemetry, measurements, scientific returns. Earth could still hear them directly. But now that the spacecraft are silent, the plaque becomes the only remaining message they carry. Not active, not transmitting, not readable from Earth, but physically present. That statement is fragile. It says, "We are here." Or perhaps, more accurately, "We were here." Because by the time anyone finds the plaque, the tense may have changed. Earth may still be alive and full of human voices. Or it may not. Humanity may be changed beyond recognition, spread elsewhere, gone, or transformed into something the plaque can no longer represent. The message is fixed, but the species that sent it is not. That gap between message and future is part of its melancholy. The plaque preserves one moment of humanity. Not all of us. One moment. How do you introduce a planet? How do you compress a species? How do you speak to a mind you cannot imagine? The plaque cannot solve those questions. It can only begin them. And maybe that is the true purpose of a first message. Not to complete understanding, but to open the possibility of it. A perfect message to aliens may be impossible because alien understanding may be too different from our own. But a first mark can still matter. It can say that meaning was attempted. It can show that the object was not accidental. It can invite interpretation, even if interpretation fails. A failed message can still reveal a messenger. That is why the plaque remains powerful, even if no one ever reads it. Its meaning is not only in a future discovery, its meaning is also in the act of sending. It tells us that humanity, at a certain point in its history, looked at the vastness of space and chose not only to measure it, but to leave a trace inside it. We wanted the universe to know that Earth had existed, even if the universe never noticed. That desire can sound proud. The plaque is pride because it says our existence is worth marking. It is loneliness because it sends that mark into a darkness where no answer may come. It is hope because it imagines a finder. It is realism because it says almost nothing beyond what might be decoded. It is science, art, and grief, all compressed into a few engraved lines. This is why a small metal plate can carry so much emotional weight. Not because it is complex, because the situation around it is vast. A simple message becomes profound when it is attached to a spacecraft, leaving forever. A human figure becomes haunting when it is drawn on metal that may outlast human memory. A map becomes heartbreaking when home is moving, and the reader may never exist. The plaque is not important because it gives perfect information. It is important because it turns loneliness into evidence. It proves that we did not only send machines outward, we sent the idea of ourselves. And now, those ideas are no longer under our control. They are attached to silent spacecraft traveling away from the sun. We cannot update the message. We cannot correct it. We cannot add new languages, new discoveries, new warnings, new apologies, or new beauty. The plaque is fixed. Whatever humanity has become since then, whatever humanity becomes later, Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 carry that early message unchanged. That is another kind of silence. The silence of a message that cannot grow. A living civilization changes. Its understanding changes. Its image of itself changes. But the plaque does not. It remains a frozen self-portrait from a younger human age. If it is found, the finder will not know our later history from it. They will see only what we chose then, what we knew then, what we thought might matter then. This is not a flaw. It is what makes artifacts powerful. They do not tell the whole truth. They tell the truth of a moment. And the Pioneer plaque tells the truth of a moment when humanity stood near the beginning of deep space exploration and chose to mark its outgoing machines with a sign of origin. It tells the truth of a species that was still young in space, still uncertain, still divided, still imperfect, but already looking outward and imagining that somewhere, somehow, meaning might cross the dark. That is why the plaque matters, even if no one ever reads it. Because we read it. We look at it now and see ourselves trying to become a cosmic species before we knew what that meant. We see the hope, the simplicity, the vulnerability, and the strange courage of sending a message into almost certain silence. The plaque reflects us back to ourselves. It asks what we would want the universe to know, and whether any message could ever be enough. Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 carry that question without answering it. They carry it silently. And as those plaques drift beyond every conversation we can still have with them, the next silence to face is the moment when the last signals from those ghost ships finally faded. A spacecraft does not disappear all at once. Not usually. It fades in layers. First, the mission becomes harder. The signal becomes weaker. The power margins shrink. Some instruments are turned off. Engineers choose what matters most, because the spacecraft no longer has enough energy to be everything it once was. The machine continues, but it becomes simpler with time, less capable, less responsive, less present. Then, the distance grows into the story. They had already done the work that made them historic. Pioneer 10 had crossed the asteroid belt, reached Jupiter, and opened the road into the outer solar system. Pioneer 11 had followed, visited Jupiter, and then carried humanity's first close look towards Saturn. Their greatest moments were behind them, but their stories were not finished. After the planets, there was still the long outward road, and for a while, that road still had a radio voice. A faint voice, but a real one. That voice mattered because it kept the machines inside the human present. As long as Earth could hear them, they were not only artifacts. They were active, distant objects, still part of the network of human attention. Mission teams could track them. Engineers could analyze their signals. Scientists could use their data. The spacecraft were far away, but not completely lost. Communication is a strange form of nearness. A spacecraft can be billions of kilometers away and still feel connected if a signal returns. The signal does not make the distance small, but it gives the distance a bridge. It says, the machine is still there. It says the path still exists. It says the object we launched has not yet become only memory. When that signal ends, the distance becomes different. Not physically. The spacecraft does not suddenly jump farther away. The radio waves do not fail because the universe has changed its size. But emotionally, everything changes. The same object that was yesterday, a distant machine, becomes today a silent relic. It may be in almost the same region of space, moving in almost the same direction, but without the signal, Earth loses the last thread that made the machine part of our active world. There is a sadness in that quiet ending. Pioneer 11 had done something no machine had done before. It had brought Saturn close. It had moved through a region that had existed in human imagination for centuries and made it part of traveled space. Yet, when its voice faded, the ending was not a grand farewell. It was engineering reality, power, orientation, distance. The gradual inability to keep a spacecraft speaking across the dark. That is often how space missions end, not with drama, with physics. The radio signal becomes too weak. The spacecraft cannot point correctly. The power source decays. The instruments shut down. The temperature changes. A system becomes unreliable. A command cannot be executed. A receiver hears nothing usable. The end is not one poetic event, but many small losses adding together until the connection no longer survives. Not returned, not seen, we remember what a machine has done. We remember the worlds it saw. We remember that it once answered. And then the answering stops. The people who heard about that signal were living in a different technological world from the one that launched it. Computers had changed. Spacecraft had changed. The public imagination of space had changed. The voyagers had already transformed our understanding of the outer planets. Yet, Pioneer 10, the older Pathfinder, was still out there, still giving one last trace of itself across billions of kilometers. That last signal was weak enough to feel almost ghostly, not because it contained a message of emotion, but because it proved that the object was still present and nearly gone from us at the same time. A radio signal from that distance is already a kind of miracle of engineering. It leaves a spacecraft with limited power, spreads across space, reaches Earth diminished almost beyond comprehension, and is gathered by antennas built to listen for whispers from the dark. By the end, Pioneer 10 was not speaking loudly. It was barely being caught. That is a very different kind of ending from death on Earth. On Earth, endings often leave something we can see: a closed door, an empty room, a body, a ruin, a place we can return to. But when a deep space spacecraft falls silent, there is no place to visit, no grave, no final photograph of the object fading into the dark, no telescope image of the machine itself. The spacecraft is out there, but not visible. The only place the ending appears is in the absence of signal. This is what makes the Pioneers so haunting. They are not gone in the physical sense. They have not dissolved into nothing. They have not landed or crashed or burned up in an atmosphere. They continue as metal structures, carrying plaques, drifting through space, along paths that began with human intention and now continue without human control. Their silence is not the silence of non-existence. It is the silence of unreachable existence. That phrase may be the heart of this chapter. Unreachable existence. Something can still exist and yet be removed from every practical form of relationship. We know the pioneers are out there because of their trajectories and history, but knowing is not the same as contact. We cannot ask them to turn. We cannot command them to send one more image. We cannot hear their status. We cannot confirm their condition in the ordinary way. We can calculate, remember, and imagine. For a machine, perhaps that is enough. For humans, it feels incomplete. This is why the phrase ghost ship fits them so well. A ghost ship is not simply an abandoned vessel. It is a vessel whose story continues after the crew, the command, or the ordinary relationship has vanished. The pioneers have no crew, of course, and no consciousness, but they carry the same emotional shape. They are vessels without voices, moving beyond the reach of the port that launched them. Earth is the port. The pioneers are the ships that will not return. Their last signals were the final lights on the horizon. After that, the horizon closed. There is no way to know exactly what they look like now, in any detailed sense. We can estimate, model, and imagine. Their surfaces have endured radiation, dust, cold, and the long exposure of space. Their instruments are inert. Their power is gone, or far below anything useful. Their antennas still exist, but cannot speak. Their plaques remain attached, perhaps scarred by time, perhaps still legible, perhaps altered by microscopic impacts we will never see. This uncertainty adds another layer to their silence. Over deep time, space will change them. Micrometeoroids may strike them, surfaces may darken or erode, materials may weaken in ways we cannot monitor. The spacecraft may remain recognizable for immense spans of time, or they may slowly become damaged fragments of what they were. No one on Earth will watch it happen. Their aging is private, hidden in a darkness where no human eye can follow. That hidden aging is part of the sadness. When a human artifact ages on Earth, we see the marks: rust, cracks, dust, wear, fading paint. We understand time because time leaves visible signs. But the pioneers age outside our sight. Their decline after silence belongs entirely to the universe. We launched them, listened to them, lost them, and now the rest of their physical story happens without witnesses. Unless, someday, something else becomes the witness. That possibility is the only reason their silence does not feel completely closed. The plaques remain. The paths continue. The machines may never be found, but they are findable in principle. They are objects that could one day be encountered by another intelligence, or by some future human civilization, with capabilities beyond anything we have now. The chance is small, but it is not zero in the emotional sense. The message still exists because the object still exists. This is why the last signal is not the last meaning. The last signal ends our conversation with the spacecraft. It does not end what the spacecraft carries. First, they spoke actively. Now they speak only passively, and maybe never to anyone. That is a hard idea, but it is central to their beauty. So much of human communication expects response. We speak because someone might answer. We write because someone might read. We transmit because someone might receive. The silent pioneers carry a form of communication that may never complete itself. A message without a known reader. A signature without a known witness. A greeting without a conversation. It sounds tragic, but it is also honest. Humanity often sends meaning into uncertainty. We raise children without knowing their futures. We build things that may outlast us or vanish quickly. We write words no one may remember. We send radio waves into space without knowing if anyone can hear. The pioneers are an extreme version of something human beings do all the time. Act into a future we cannot control. The last signals simply make that truth cosmic. They mark the point where control ends. As long as mission control can command a spacecraft, humanity is still part of its present. Once command is impossible, the object belongs more fully to physics and time. It follows its path. It carries its materials. It moves under gravity, inertia, and the quiet laws that govern all things. The human intention remains in its origin and design, but not in its future choices, because there are no choices left to make. The pioneers have become pure consequence, launched by human decision, released by distance, preserved by motion, silenced by time. This is why their story can feel more haunting than that of spacecraft that ended more visibly. A probe crushed in an atmosphere has a final scene. A lander that stops on a planet has a location. A spacecraft intentionally destroyed has a planned ending. The pioneers do not have that kind of closure. Their missions ended, but the objects continued. The story faded without a final picture. No final image. No final command. No final answer. Only the knowledge that they are still somewhere out there. And perhaps that is enough to make them unforgettable. The mind keeps returning to the fact that these machines remain in existence after every practical relationship with them is over. They are like sentences sent into a language no one may speak, or seeds thrown into a field we will never visit. They carry the emotional weight of unfinished communication. In this way, the last signals were not simply the end of engineering contact, they were the beginning of the spacecraft's afterlife. Not an afterlife in any mystical sense, a physical afterlife. The period after mission, after telemetry, after response, after the machine has stopped being useful and starts becoming symbolic. Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 entered that phase when Earth could no longer hear them. From then on, their meaning lived not in new data, but in what they had already done and what they still carried. This is the quiet transformation of a spacecraft into a relic. A working spacecraft belongs to science. A silent spacecraft belongs to memory. A drifting silent spacecraft belongs to deep time. The pioneers now belong to all three, but not equally. Their science is historical. Their memory is human. Their deep time is still unfolding. They are no longer tools in our hands. They are artifacts that escaped our hands, carrying a trace of human purpose into a future that may never return it. That escape can be painful to think about, but it is also the point. We built them to go where we could not. We built them to cross distances our bodies cannot cross. We built them to show us worlds that were once only lights in the sky, and when their signals ended, the deepest part of that purpose remained. They had gone beyond us. Completely. The last signals did not mean the pioneers failed. They meant the pioneers had become what they were always going to become if they lasted long enough. Silent travelers. The sadness comes from the fact that we were able to follow them only part of the way. We watched them launch. We heard them near Jupiter. We heard Pioneer 11 after Saturn. We listened across decades. But eventually, the darkness grew wider than the voice. The signal faded. The machines kept going. Earth stayed behind. That is the shape of the story. A departure that becomes discovery. A discovery that becomes silence. A silence that becomes deep time. And once the last signals from Earth's first ghost ships had faded, the next question is why we can never speak to them again. At first, that question sounds almost too simple. If the spacecraft are still out there, why not try harder? Why not point a larger antenna toward them? Why not send a stronger signal? Wait longer, listen more carefully, or build a new instrument that can find them again. To someone hearing the story from a distance, the silence may sound like a temporary problem, a lost connection, a weak call, a machine too far away but perhaps not gone completely. But deep space is not like a dropped phone call. The loss is not only about effort. That fading is quiet, but absolute. A spacecraft can be healthy in structure and still become silent because it no longer has the energy to speak. The antenna may still exist. The transmitter may still be physically attached. The spacecraft may still be moving along its path. But without enough power, those parts are no longer a voice. They are only shapes in the dark. This is one reason the pioneers cannot simply be called again. Calling a spacecraft is not like shouting into a canyon. It is a two-sided relationship. Earth can send a command, but the spacecraft must receive it, understand it, respond to it, and have enough power to transmit something back. If the spacecraft no longer has the ability to listen or answer, then even the strongest message from Earth becomes only radiation passing through space. A command without a receiver is not communication. The pioneers also faced the problem of direction. To communicate across deep space, a spacecraft must point its antenna toward Earth with enough accuracy. This is easy to say and extremely difficult to maintain forever. Earth is not fixed in one place. It orbits the Sun. The spacecraft moves on its own path. The geometry changes with time. A deep space antenna is like a narrow bridge between two moving points, and if the bridge cannot be held, the connection breaks. For an active spacecraft, attitude control can help. Small thrusters, sensors, spin, and guidance systems can keep the antenna properly aimed. But those systems age. Fuel becomes limited or unusable. Power declines. Components fail or become too weak to control orientation. Eventually, even if the spacecraft physically survives, it may no longer be able to keep its face turned toward home. That phrase sounds almost too human. Keep its face turned toward home. But for a spacecraft, that is partly what communication means. The high-gain antenna is the face that speaks to Earth. If it cannot face Earth, the voice is lost. In the case of Pioneer 11, this problem became especially important. As the spacecraft aged and Earth moved out of the view, its antenna could maintain. The mission could no longer continue. The machine was still somewhere out there, but the geometry of communication had slipped beyond recovery. The same is true in a larger emotional way. For decades, Earth and the pioneers remained aligned enough for a relationship to exist. A planet with receivers and two small machines in the dark could still exchange information, but time slowly destroyed that alignment. Power declined, distance grew, orientation became harder, hardware aged, the radio link thinned. The spacecraft did not choose silence. Silence arrived as the natural result of conditions that could no longer hold. This is why don't we contact them again? Has such a sad answer. That distinction matters. This is one of them. The final attempts to hear Pioneer 10 make this clear. Even after its last weak signal, Earth did not instantly stop caring. Attempts were made to detect it again. Large antennas listened. Engineers searched for what might remain. But eventually, the absence became clear. The spacecraft had passed beyond practical communication, not because humanity forgot it, but because the physical conditions no longer allowed the relationship to continue. That is a different kind of loss from abandonment. Abandonment suggests choice. This acceptance is part of space exploration, though it is rarely the part people think about first. We celebrate launch, arrival, images, and discoveries. But every deep space mission also contains an ending written into it from the beginning. Power will fade. Parts will age. Communication will become harder. The mission team will one day send final commands or search for final signals. The spacecraft will cross from active explorer into memory. For the pioneers, that crossing feels especially powerful because they are not sitting on another world. They are still leaving. Their silence is attached to motion. That is what makes them feel so lonely. A dead rover on a planet has a place. A silent orbiter has an orbit, at least for a time. A crashed probe has an endpoint. Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 have no such resting place. Their endings are not locations. Their endings are broken links on paths that continue. And they are still moving now. This is hard for the mind to hold. Human beings like endings to have shapes. We like graves, memorials, last photographs, final words, named places. The pioneers offer none of that. Their final signals came from remote positions, but those positions are not where the objects remain forever. By the time we remember the last contact, the spacecraft has already moved on. The grave is not a point in space. It is a line extending outward. That is perhaps the hardest boundary. We can improve our antennas. We can process signals more carefully. We can build better receivers. We can search the sky with more sensitive instruments. But the spacecraft must still provide something to receive. If it has no power to transmit, if its antenna is not aligned, if its electronics no longer function, then the silence does not come from Earth's weakness alone. It comes from the spacecraft's own end. A better ear cannot hear a voice that no longer exists. That sentence captures the tragedy of pioneer communication. Earth can become better at listening, but listening cannot resurrect the speaker. At most, future technologies might find the objects in some direct or indirect way, perhaps by calculation, perhaps by some capability we do not yet have. But that would not be speaking to Pioneer 10 or Pioneer 11 in the old way. It would be locating relics, studying artifacts, finding bodies after the voices are gone. There is a deep difference between contact and discovery. Radio is fast and fragile. Metal is slow and stubborn. The pioneers moved from the first kind of communication to the second. During their missions, they spoke through radio waves, sending information back across hours of light travel time. Now, if they ever speak again, it will be through physical encounter. Someone must find the object. Someone must notice the plaque. Someone must interpret the symbols. Communication has slowed from near instant, by cosmic standards, to something that may take longer than the lifespan of civilizations. That is why we can never speak to them again in the normal sense. The conversation has changed into archaeology. This is the same transformation that happens when we study ancient ruins on Earth, but stretched to an almost impossible scale. A ruined city no longer speaks with living voices, but its stones, tools, bones, and inscriptions can still say something. They do not answer questions. They reveal traces. The pioneers are like future ruins, except they are not buried under sand. They are drifting between stars. They are ruins in motion, and we are the civilization that made them. The human time scale sits painfully between them. We are close enough to remember the launches, the flybys, and the last signals. But we are too early to know whether the artifacts will ever matter to anyone else. We live in the narrow middle, after the voices ended and before any possible future discovery. This middle is where the loneliness lives. The pioneers are gone from us, but not gone from existence. They are no longer participants in our present, but they are still participants in the future of matter. That future may be uneventful. Most likely they will drift through space without being found. Space is too large, stars too separated, and the spacecraft too small. They may pass through the galaxy for immense ages as anonymous metal objects, never close enough to any world, telescope, or intelligence to be noticed. If that happens, their plaques will remain messages with no readers. But even then, they will have mattered, because not all meaning depends on reception. A message can matter because it reveals the sender. The pioneer plaques reveal something about humanity, even if no alien ever sees them. The silent spacecraft reveal our desire to explore, even if no future mind recovers them. The loss of contact reveals the limit of our reach. The continuing motion reveals the consequence of our ambition. That is the whole story in one line. It is a beautiful and painful line. The impossibility of contacting them again does not reduce their meaning. It increases it. If we could still call them easily, they would be distant spacecraft. Because we cannot, they have become something closer to myth, though their reality is entirely physical. They are real objects, moving in real space, but they occupy the imagination like legends, because no new information comes back to shrink them. Silence allows distance to become symbolic, and their silence is permanent enough to feel almost sacred. Not sacred in a religious sense necessarily, but sacred as in untouchable, removed from ordinary interference, beyond correction, beyond update, beyond retrieval. The pioneers now carry the early human message exactly as it was, not as we might improve it today. We cannot rewrite their plaques. We cannot add the rest of our story. We cannot apologize for what they omit. We cannot send a patch or revision. The spacecraft have become fixed statements. This is another reason we cannot speak to them again, because even our message to the universe, in their case, is frozen. The pioneers are not a live conversation with the cosmos. They are a sealed envelope. Whatever we placed inside the meaning of those missions is what remains. The machines are no longer instruments through which humanity can adjust itself. They are completed gestures, continuing through space long after the hands that made the gesture have moved on. A completed gesture can be powerful. It can also be uncomfortable. It reminds us that the things we send outward may outlast our ability to explain them. Every spacecraft, every broadcast, every artifact, every signal leaving Earth carries some version of this risk. Once released, it no longer belongs fully to the present. It can be interpreted later, misunderstood later, found later, or never found at all. Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 are early examples of this cosmic uncertainty. They show us that exploration is not only discovery, it is release. To explore deeply is to accept that some of what we send will not come back, and some of what we learn will arrive only before the silence. This does not make exploration tragic. It makes it honest. The solar system is not a small room where everything can be retrieved. It is an expanding scale of distance, delay, and loss. The farther we send machines, the more likely they become one-way extensions of ourselves. The pioneers were among the first to teach this. They taught it scientifically by reaching the giant planets. They teach it emotionally by never returning to our voice. That is why the answer to why we can never speak to them again is not only technical. The technical answer is power, distance, antenna geometry, aging hardware, and signals too weak to recover. But the deeper answer is that they have crossed from the age of mission into the age of relic. And relics do not answer. They endure. The pioneers endure without speaking. Somewhere in the dark, their antennas are still shaped like instruments of communication, but they no longer communicate. Their plaques are still shaped like messages, but they have no reader. Their paths are still shaped by human launch decisions, but human control has ended. Everything about them points back to Earth, and yet nothing about them can now return to Earth. That is the final separation. The machines that once made the outer solar system feel closer now make distance feel absolute. They remind us that communication is temporary, but motion can continue. They remind us that a spacecraft can outlive its mission by becoming unreachable. They remind us that human exploration often leaves behind objects that carry our meaning farther than our control. And once we understand why we can never speak to them again, the next thing to feel is that silence does not mean they have stopped moving. That is the strange part. For Earth, Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 have ended. Their missions are over, their signals are gone. Their instruments are no longer sending discoveries home. The people who once waited for their data can no longer receive anything new from them. In the human world, they belong to history now, placed beside old photographs, mission records, diagrams, launch dates, and last contact notes. But in space, their story did not stop with our last signal. The spacecraft continued. They are not waiting in rain. They are not sinking under an ocean. They are not resting in a desert. They are moving through a place where stopping is not the default ending. This does not mean they are safe forever. Space is not gentle in an absolute sense. Dust, radiation, temperature, and deep time still work on them. But space does not provide the same quick return to decay that Earth does. There is no soil to bury them, no atmosphere to burn them, no weather to grind them down every day. They can remain as recognizable objects for immense spans of time, not because they are alive, but because they have escaped the ordinary places where human artifacts disappear. We left them behind, but not like abandoned tools sitting in one place. We left them behind in motion. We released them into trajectories that continue beyond our attention, beyond our power, beyond our ability to call them back. They are behind us in communication, but ahead of us in distance. They are old machines, but they are also still doing the one thing that deep space machines do best: leaving. That leaving has a direction. Pioneer 10 is moving generally toward the region of Taurus, in the direction of Aldebaran, the bright orange star that marks the eye of the bull in our sky. This does not mean it is aimed like an arrow for a meeting. The distance is enormous, and the time scale is measured in millions of years. From a human perspective, Aldebaran is not a destination. It is a direction so distant that the word destination almost stops working. Still, the direction matters to the imagination. It gives the silence a line, somewhere beyond the planets, beyond the old route past Jupiter. Pioneer 10 is heading outward into a region of the galaxy where the constellations will not look the way they look from Earth. The stars around it slowly shift. The sun becomes only one more distant point. The spacecraft carries no awareness of this, but we do. And because we do, we can imagine the small machine moving away from the sun, away from the star that powered every living thing on Earth, away from the only home its makers had ever known. Two machines, two directions. This is one of the calm facts that becomes terrifying when you sit with it long enough. Out there, nothing is actively carrying them like a river. There is no cosmic current in the ordinary sense. They coast because they already had speed. Their engines are not pushing them through the dark. Their missions are not guiding them. Their computers are not choosing. The great departure has become passive. They are moving because long ago Earth gave them motion, and the planets bent that motion into escape. A spacecraft can become a memory of speed. In deep time, this becomes almost unsettling. Every year, the pioneers move farther from the sun. Every century, they become deeper artifacts of a younger humanity. Every millennium, the world that launched them changes more. Cities rise and fall. Languages shift. New generations live under skies where the pioneers are too distant to matter in daily life. But the spacecraft continue. If no collision or encounter alters them, they can remain as ancient human objects long after the story of their missions has become remote history. The scale is hard to feel. 1,000 years is already longer than many civilizations remain stable. They were built for missions measured in months and years, but they were released into futures measured in millions of years. That contrast is part of their emotional power. A human project with a short working life can become a deep-time artifact simply because of where it was sent. The machine does not need to stay alive to enter deep time. It only needs to keep existing and moving. This is where the difference between dead and gone becomes important. That is why they feel almost like legends. But they are not legends. They are real metal objects. Somewhere, the high-gain antenna of Pioneer 10 still exists, perhaps battered by microscopic impacts, perhaps altered by time in ways we will never see. Somewhere, Pioneer 11 still carries the shape of a spacecraft that once passed Saturn. The plaques are still attached unless deep time has damaged them. The machines still have a front and a back, a structure, an origin, and a direction. They are real in the most physical sense, even though they have become unreachable to us. That phrase does not mean they have purpose now. Their purpose belonged to their mission. Their motion is not intention, but motion can carry meaning, even after purpose ends. A stone thrown into a lake still sends ripples after it leaves the hand. A spacecraft launched into deep space still carries the shape of the launch after the mission has gone silent. The pioneers are ripples in interstellar darkness. They tell us that human action can extend far beyond human presence. We do not need to be there for the consequence to remain. We do not need to watch for the object to continue. We do not need to hear the signal for the motion to be real. This is both humbling and strangely comforting. The universe does not need us to keep looking in order for our traces to continue. But that comfort has an edge. That may be the truest description. Escaped does not mean they ran away. It means their situation has moved beyond the practical reach of the species that made them. We can talk about them, calculate them, write about them, remember them, and imagine them. But the spacecraft themselves are no longer inside our world of action. They exist in a realm where only physics touches them now. A different direction, a different path through the dark. The two machines are like thoughts sent away from the same mind, never returning, never meeting, never knowing what they carry. Their paths are separate, but together they form part of humanity's first outward signature. Voyager may be the richer message. New Horizons may be the later visitor to Pluto and beyond. But the pioneers are the earlier marks, the first quiet proof that human machines could keep traveling after the old map ended. There is a reason this feels emotional, even though the spacecraft feel nothing. They represent a human pattern that exists everywhere in smaller forms. We send children into futures we cannot control. We write messages that may be read after we are gone. We build things that outlast us. We take actions whose consequences continue beyond our awareness. The pioneers make that pattern cosmic. They are consequences leaving the solar system. They show us that not every ending is still. The trajectory does not, at least not on any scale we can use. This makes the pioneers almost impossible to mourn in a normal way. We mourn things that are gone, but they are not gone completely. We miss signals, not bodies. We lost contact, not existence. The spacecraft are not alive, but they also are not merely past. They are ongoing objects whose current chapter is unreadable. That unreadable chapter may last longer than the readable one by millions of years. The readable part is short: launch, cruise, encounters, signals, last contact. The unreadable part is enormous: silent travel, slow aging, deep space, possible future discovery, or endless anonymity. Most of the pioneer story, if measured in time, happens after we stop receiving it. That is what makes the last signals feel so small compared with what follows. We witnessed the beginning. We do not witness the rest. This is true of many things in the universe, but with the pioneers it feels personal because we made them. Stars live and die beyond us. Galaxies merge beyond us. Planets drift and evolve beyond us. But Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 are not natural strangers. They were assembled by human hands, launched by human decisions, and tracked by human instruments. Their deep future is a continuation of something we began. That beginning still matters. Not many, not close to any other star, not enough to fill the galaxy, but enough to say the boundary was crossed. This matters because the first crossing of a boundary changes the imagination. Before it happens, the boundary feels absolute. After it happens, it becomes part of history. The pioneers did not carry humans into interstellar space, but they carried human-made matter outward in that direction. They turned the idea of leaving into a physical event. Now, the event continues. Quietly, without signal, without witnesses. The spacecraft do not need our awareness to remain part of the universe. That is perhaps the deepest humility of their story. We are not the center of their motion anymore. We began it, but we do not sustain it. We named them, but the names do not guide them. We remember them, but memory does not alter their course. They have become independent consequences inside a universe far larger than the minds that made them, and this independence makes them beautiful. They are not beautiful like planets, nebulae, or galaxies. They are beautiful like abandoned instruments, like old letters, like footprints preserved where no one can walk back. Their beauty comes from their fragility against scale, a small, human-made object moving through distances built for stars. A metal plaque carrying simplified human figures into a darkness that may never answer. A machine that no longer works, still fulfilling the final shape of its path. That is the kind of beauty that belongs to deep space. Quiet, unreachable, almost unbearable if you think about it too long. Still, there is comfort in knowing they move. If they had simply vanished, the story would feel closed. If they had burned, crashed, or been destroyed, we could place the ending somewhere. But their continued motion keeps the story open. Not open in the sense of new data, open in the sense of time. The pioneers are still in a future tense. They are still becoming farther. Every moment makes the distance larger. Every moment makes Earth smaller in relation to their path. Every moment carries the plaques into a future where the solar system itself becomes only a point behind them. This is not useful in any practical way. It does not help mission control. It does not send back science. It does not solve a human problem. But it changes the imagination. It means that something of Earth is still traveling outward. A machine can become a kind of sentence. The pioneers are sentences Earth wrote into space. The sentence is not long. It does not explain everything. It may never be read, but it continues moving away from the writer. That is what the pioneers are now. Old sentences in metal, written by a young spacefaring species, drifting through a galaxy that may never answer. And because they continue moving without us, the next question becomes what kind of existence they have now. Somewhere between death, memory, and the future. This is where the pioneers become difficult to describe. If they were ordinary machines, we would simply say they are dead. Their power is gone. Their instruments are silent. Their transmitters no longer speak to Earth. They cannot receive commands, take new measurements, correct their own stories, or tell us what is happening around them. By every practical mission definition, Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 are no longer alive as spacecraft. But that word feels incomplete. Dead usually suggests an ending. Something stops, and the story closes around it. A machine breaks on Earth, and eventually it is repaired, discarded, recycled, buried, or forgotten. A vehicle stops moving. A building falls. A tool loses its purpose and remains in the place where it failed. But the pioneers are different, because their failure of function did not become a failure of motion. They stopped speaking, but they did not stop traveling. That may sound simple, but emotionally, it is enormous. Human beings often connect existence with relationship. Something feels real to us when we can see it, touch it, hear it, photograph it, visit it, or receive some kind of answer from it. Once all those relationships disappear, the mind begins to treat the object as gone. The pioneers challenge that instinct. We cannot hear them, and yet they remain. We cannot visit them, and yet they are not imaginary. We cannot know their present condition in detail, and yet their paths continue. They are real, beyond experience. That is one of the quiet terrors of deep space. It is full of things that are real beyond experience. Distant worlds we may never visit. Stars already dead, whose light still reaches us. Black holes we understand through their effects. Galaxies whose present condition is forever hidden by distance and time. The pioneers are different only because they are ours. They are not natural strangers. They began on Earth. Human hands assembled them. Human minds calculated their paths. Human listeners once heard their signals. That phrase is not technically precise, but emotionally it is close. They carry the end of their missions with them. There is no resting place to mark, no surface where their story can be visited, no final valley or crater or orbit that contains them. Their endings are traveling endings. Every moment, the place where they last spoke becomes more distant from where they are now. The grave cannot be found because the grave is the path. This makes them feel unfinished. Not unfinished because the missions failed, but unfinished because the objects continue after the narrative has ended. We know the launch, we know the encounters, we know the last signals, but the current chapter is unreadable. It is happening physically, somewhere in the dark, but no one is receiving it. The spacecraft are still passing through time, but their story has moved outside narration. A story can keep happening after no one can tell it. That is the strange condition of the pioneers. They are not alive, but they are not merely past. They are past made physical, continuing forward. The early 1970s are not only in archives and old film. They are also embodied in two spacecraft moving away from the sun. A moment of human history became metal, and that metal became a traveler. Long after the human world changed, the material consequence of that moment continued. The pioneers are ahead of us. They come from the past, but they are moving into the future. They are old, but their journey is younger than the distance still waiting in front of them. This reversal is difficult to feel at first. We imagine relics as things dug up, found beneath ruins, recovered from underwater, or preserved in museums. But Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 are relics that have not finished leaving. They are ancient-seeming objects that are still becoming more distant. But human meaning changed. This is how objects become symbols. The thing itself remains metal, structure, and trajectory. But around it, human imagination grows. We remember the launch, the flybys, the plaque, the last signal. We compare the silence to loneliness, the motion to exile, the plaque to a message in a bottle. None of these comparisons are technically necessary, but they help us feel the scale. They turn a silent spacecraft into a mirror. This is not a flaw in the story. It is the story. The pioneers were always going to become unreachable if they survived long enough. Their silence was not a betrayal of the mission. It was the final shape of the mission extended across enough time. A probe, sent outward, can either fail early, die at a destination, or continue until it outlives its voice. Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 did the last of these. They succeeded so completely in leaving that they became impossible to keep. That is why Dead and Gone are not the same. They can no longer measure Jupiter or Saturn. They can no longer report on particles, fields, or the environment beyond the planets. They can no longer hear Earth. They can no longer act as instruments. In that sense, they are dead. But they are still becoming gone in a physical sense, still increasing the distance, still moving farther from the star that held every human lifetime so far. Gone is a direction between Earth and the stars. This middle place may be where many human-made objects in space eventually belong. Not only the pioneers, but old probes, spent stages, silent landers, abandoned orbiters, and distant spacecraft that will one day stop answering. Space exploration creates a growing archaeology before the future has arrived. We are already leaving ruins beyond Earth, but some of those ruins are not resting anywhere. They are traveling. The pioneers are among the earliest and most poetic examples. Their silence is not empty because the objects still carry context. They carry the ambitions of the early space age, the first crossings towards the giant planets, and the beginning of humanity's attempt to place itself on a larger map. They carry the plaque, which is not only a message to aliens, but a message to ourselves, about what we hoped our outward reach meant. They carry the memory of a time when the outer solar system was still becoming real through machines. When we remember Pioneer 10, we are remembering something that still exists far away. When we remember Pioneer 11, we are remembering a machine whose path continues in silence. Memory usually points backward. Here, memory also points outward. It has coordinates, direction, speed, and deep time attached to it. This is why the pioneers can feel almost alive in imagination, even though they are not alive at all. The mind is drawn to motion. Motion suggests a journey. A journey suggests a traveler. A traveler suggests experience. But the spacecraft experience nothing. They do not see the dark. They do not feel cold. They do not know that Earth has aged. The emotional life belongs entirely to us. We are the ones turning trajectory into story. That does not make the story false. Their meaning comes from origin and distance together. Origin says they are ours. For living beings, death means the end of experience. For a machine, death usually means the end of function. But a space machine can lose function and still have a future as matter, artifact, and message. The pioneers no longer have operational futures, but they have physical futures. They will continue to be somewhere. They may pass near nothing important. They may slowly erode. They may be struck, altered, or preserved, but they are not finished being part of the universe. That is not life. But it is continuation, and continuation has its own emotional power. We are used to thinking that meaning requires activity. A working spacecraft matters because it returns data. A living person matters because they act, feel, speak, choose, and relate. But some meanings remain after action ends. A silent memorial matters because it stands. A fossil matters because it preserves. A ruin matters because it reveals. A dead spacecraft in interstellar space matters because it carries origin into distance. The pioneers no longer do. A witness does not always speak. Sometimes, a witness simply remains. Pioneer 10 remains as the first machine that opened the road to Jupiter and kept going. Pioneer 11 remains as the first machine that brought Saturn close and then left it behind. Their plaques remain as attempts to identify the makers. Their paths remain as the final extension of human decisions. Their silence remains as the proof that distance eventually defeats conversation. Together, they form a quiet lesson. Not everything that is dead is gone. Not everything that is gone is erased. Not everything that is silent has stopped meaning something. This lesson matters because the future of space exploration will create more such objects. Every spacecraft we send far enough may one day enter this category. Working, then fading, then silent, then relic, then deep time artifact. The pioneers are early examples of a destiny that may one day belong to many human machines. They are not only a story from the past, they are a preview of how space turns missions into archaeology. Maybe that is why they feel so gentle and so terrifying at the same time. Gentle, because they do not threaten us. They are small, silent, harmless machines drifting through darkness. Terrifying, because they reveal a truth about scale that is larger than any single mission. Space does not simply take objects away. It changes what away means. It creates distances where existence continues after relationship ends. That is a lonely kind of immortality. Not true immortality, because even spacecraft can be damaged or destroyed across enough time. But immortality compared with the short human lives that made them. A person who helped build Pioneer 10 may live, work, age, and die, while the machine continues outward long after. The object is less alive, and yet more enduring. That reversal can feel unsettling. We made something far simpler than ourselves, and then sent it into a path where it may outlast nearly everything we personally know. Human beings are fragile. Our artifacts can be strangely persistent. This does not mean the artifact is greater than the life that made it. It means life can create traces that continue beyond life. That is part of why we build, write, launch, and remember. We know we are temporary, so we send meaning forward. The pioneers are among the most extreme versions of that impulse, meaning sent not only forward in time, but outward in space. They do not carry our whole meaning. They could not. But they carry enough to make the silence feel personal. A metal plaque, a path past giant planets, a long-dead radio voice, a body moving beyond return. That is not all of humanity, but it is something undeniably human. It is curiosity made mechanical. It is a goodbye turned into motion. It is the difference between vanishing and leaving a trace. And perhaps that is the deepest difference between dead and gone. Dead is what happens when the voice ends. Gone is what happens when the trace disappears. The pioneers have lost their voices, but the traces remain. As long as they exist, somewhere in the dark, the story is not erased, it has only changed form. It has moved from signal to object, from mission to relic, from present contact to future possibility. We cannot hear them, but they are still carrying the fact that they were made. We cannot speak to them, but they still speak silently by existing. That silent speaking may never reach anyone else, but it reaches us now through imagination. We think of them, and the universe feels larger. We think of them, and human history feels less confined to Earth. We think of them, and the word distance becomes emotional. We think of them, and the difference between dead and gone becomes clear. Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 are dead spacecraft. But they are not gone. Not yet. Maybe not for a very long time. And if they are neither alive nor truly gone, then the next thing to imagine is what they might become in deep time. Deep time is where the pioneers stop feeling like spacecraft and start feeling like fossils from the future. Not fossils buried in stone, not bones pressed into ancient rock, not shells discovered by a later species on a beach that no longer exists. They are different. They are artificial fossils, made before they were lost, launched before they were ancient, and sent into a kind of preservation that Earth rarely gives to anything. They were built as working machines, but the longer they drift, the more they become evidence of a moment, rather than tools from a mission. At human scale, Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 are already old. At cosmic scale, they have barely begun to leave, and still, the machine may continue. That thought is both beautiful and uncomfortable. A simple object can outlast the world of meaning that made it. Not Earth itself, perhaps, but the specific human world that gave it a name, a mission, and a story. Pioneer 10 may still exist when the names of its engineers are known only in archives, or not known at all. Pioneer 11 may still carry its plaque when Saturn has completed thousands of orbits since the flyby. The spacecraft may become older than every institution that once supported them. This is not because they are powerful, it is because they are small and far away. That is important, because their beauty does not come from lasting forever. Almost nothing lasts forever. Stars die, planets change, galaxies collide, black holes evaporate on unimaginable timescales. The pioneers are not exceptions to cosmic decay. Their beauty comes from the gap between their smallness and their endurance. They are fragile machines that may still carry our trace for timescales far beyond any human memory. In deep time, they may become less like spacecraft and more like questions. What was the world that built this? Did its makers survive? Did they ever leave their star? Did they know how unlikely it was that this object would be found? Still, the possibility changes the way we think about them. A message that may never be read is still different from no message at all. No guarantee that the idea of reading will even apply. That makes them feel almost lonely beyond language. They contain a message, but the message floats inside a universe that may never give it a mind. They carry identity, but identity needs recognition to become communication. Without a finder, the plaque is not a conversation, it is a potential conversation held in metal. Not because the pioneers are advanced, but because they are ancient. If an intelligence ever found one of them far in the future, it might be studying a technological relic from a civilization that was young when it launched the object. The spacecraft would not represent our most complete knowledge, our most mature science, or our deepest understanding of ourselves. It would represent an early attempt, a first reach, a simple sign from a species that had barely begun to send machines outward. In that sense, finding a pioneer would be like finding a child's drawing in the ruins of a lost city. Not complete, not perfect. That is a powerful thought. We often imagine future first contact as something active, a message transmitted, a reply received, a conversation slowly forming across light years. But the pioneers offer another kind of contact, one that may happen without us. They could become ambassadors after their mission, after their signal, after their makers have changed or vanished. They could introduce us when we are no longer present, to explain ourselves. A broken pot does not explain the meal. A fossil does not explain the animal's fear or hunger. A ruin does not fully explain the people who walked inside it. An old spacecraft will not explain humanity completely. It will only say that we were capable of making such a thing and sending it away. The rest must be guessed. That guessing may be kinder or colder than the truth. A future intelligence might see the plaque and understand that the object was made by living beings. It might recognize mathematics, anatomy, trajectory, and origin. Or it might misunderstand almost everything. It might see the human figures as symbols of power, or warning, or ritual. It might not know what Earth was like. It might not understand why a species would send such a small object into such a vast dark. Even a successful discovery may still be full of mystery. The message is brave because it risks misunderstanding. It is beautiful because it tries anyway. This is what the pioneers may become in deep time. Not perfect messages, but brave fragments. Small human fragments wandering beyond the planets, carrying the incomplete truth of their origin. They may become unreadable. They may become damaged. They may never be found. But their existence still says that humanity once reached outward before it knew whether anyone would ever reach back. That is a deep time kind of courage. There is also hope, and maybe there is something like grief. That is a haunting idea. An object can keep the truth of its origin even after memory loses it. Pioneer 10 would still be from Earth even if Earth forgot it. Pioneer 11 would still have passed Saturn even if no living mind remembered the mission. The plaque would still be an attempt at communication even if the civilization that made it no longer thought in the same symbols. Deep time can separate fact from memory. The fact remains, in matter, the memory may vanish. This is why the pioneers feel like both history and prophecy. They tell us what we did, they also show us what may happen to what we do. A construction without its builders, a message without its language. That may be their far future if no one preserves the context and no one finds them with enough understanding. They would become artificial but unexplained, evidence but uncertain evidence. Their plaques would remain attempts at meaning, but meaning might not fully cross the gap. And yet, even that future has a strange beauty, because the attempt itself once happened. For a brief time in the history of one planet, a species looked outward and placed marks on machines. It imagined a reader beyond itself. It understood that the odds were terrible and sent the message anyway. Deep time may erase the context, but it cannot erase that the act occurred unless the objects themselves are destroyed. The action was real. That reality matters. The pioneers may never become famous to another mind. They may never become sacred relics. They may never be opened, decoded, protected, or understood. But they have already become something important to us. Proof that humanity began leaving traces beyond the planetary neighborhood. They are not only future artifacts, they are present mirrors. What remains of a civilization when no one is there to explain it? What remains of a message when no one answers? What remains of a machine after its purpose is gone? What remains of humanity when all that survives is a small object moving through darkness? The pioneers do not answer these questions directly. They carry them. That may be why their future feels so quiet. Nothing dramatic has to happen. No alien ship has to discover them. No collision has to destroy them. No future human museum has to reclaim them. The most likely future may be endless, uneventful motion, and somehow that is more powerful than a dramatic ending. The thought of them simply continuing is enough. Continuing past our lifetimes, past our politics, past our arguments, past the people who remember hearing their names for the first time. The machines become a measure of how short human attention is. We can spend years building them, decades tracking them, a few generations remembering them, and then they may continue for millions of years without needing any of that attention. The universe is patient with objects, in a way human societies rarely are. It lets them drift, and drifting is what the pioneers may do best now. Not exploring in the active sense, not observing, not reporting, not deciding, not seeking. Simply drifting. But because they are artificial, even drifting becomes meaningful. A natural rock drifting through interstellar space is part of the universe's ordinary debris. A pioneer drifting through interstellar space is different because it contains intention. It was shaped, launched, and marked. It is matter that once passed through human imagination. That makes it a kind of memory object, even if no one remembers. The phrase sounds contradictory, but deep time is full of contradictions like that. A memory object can outlast memory. A message can outlast its language. A machine can outlast its mission. A trace can outlast the story that explains it. The pioneers belong to this category now. They are becoming objects whose meaning is larger than their function and more fragile than their metal. This is why we should not imagine their deep future only as loss. It is also transformation. They began as machines of measurement. They became messengers. They became silent travelers. In deep time, they may become artifacts, relics, clues, ruins, symbols, or nothing anyone ever sees. Each stage removes them farther from their original purpose, but it does not necessarily remove meaning. It changes the kind of meaning they carry. Science became memory. Memory becomes myth. Myth may become archaeology. Archaeology may become mystery. And mystery may last longest of all. That is the path of deep time. It does not preserve things in the way the present wants them preserved. It changes them. It removes names, voices, and explanations. It leaves fragments and asks future minds to rebuild what they can. The pioneers are already on that path. Their names still matter to us now, but someday the names may be less important than the simple fact of their existence. A human-made object crossed into the dark. That fact may be the final message, not the plaque alone, not the last signal, not the mission record. The object itself, a piece of Earth, shaped by intelligence, moving where Earth cannot follow. In the end, what the pioneers become in deep time may depend less on them than on who, if anyone, is there to notice. If no one finds them, they become silent continuity. If future humans find them, they become ancestral relics. If another intelligence finds them, they become a first clue. If they are damaged beyond recognition, they become lost fragments. If they last untouched, they become waiting messages. All of these futures are possible in imagination. None of them are guaranteed. And the lack of guarantee is part of the feeling. Deep space does not promise meaning. It only allows the possibility that meaning can travel. Pioneer 10 and Pioneer 11 carry that possibility farther from Earth every year. They may never fulfill it. They may never be read, recovered, or understood. But because they exist, humanity has already placed meaning on a path that does not end with our listening. That is why the deep-time future of the pioneers is not only sad, it is vast. It makes human life feel small, but it also makes human action feel strangely durable. A mission built for a few years can become an artifact for millions. A plaque engraved in one historical moment can drift into ages no human can picture. A machine that no longer works can still carry the shape of curiosity outward. The pioneers may become ruins. They may become messages. They may become forgotten metal. They may become the first artifacts of Earth, ever found by something beyond Earth. Or they may become nothing more than two silent objects crossing the dark, forever beyond all witnesses. Even that last future does not make them meaningless, because for us, here and now, they already show what it means to send something away without return. They show how a machine can outlive its voice, how a message can survive without an audience, and how the future of a spacecraft can become far larger than the mission that created it. And after following the pioneers into deep time, the final question is why humans leave machines behind in the first place. At first, the answer seems practical. We leave machines behind because the universe is too large for our bodies. We cannot walk to Jupiter. We cannot cross the asteroid belt in person. We cannot stand beside Saturn and look back at the sun with our own eyes. We cannot survive the radiation, the cold, the distance, the years of travel, or the silence between worlds. So we build machines to go where human life cannot go. That is the simple answer, but not the whole answer. We keep returning to the idea that two silent machines from Earth are still traveling somewhere beyond the planets. That means the pioneers are carrying more than scientific history. They are carrying a human need that is older than spaceflight, the need to reach beyond the edge of the known world and leave a trace there. Long before rockets, humans left marks on cave walls, carved stones, raised monuments, buried the dead with objects, built temples, wrote names, drew maps, and told stories about places they had never seen. We have always lived inside limits, and we have always tried to push meaning beyond them. Spacecraft are the newest form of that old impulse. They are not only tools, they are extensions of the human reach. That final part is what turns them from explorers into symbols. If they had ended at the planets, their story would still be important, but more contained. They would belong to Jupiter and Saturn. But because their paths continued outward, they became part of a larger idea, that exploration sometimes leaves behind objects that no longer belong to any destination. They are not on Earth, not on Jupiter, not on Saturn, not truly in the inner human world anymore. They are between stars. This is a strange kind of legacy. Most legacies are meant to stay near the people who remember them. A building stands in a city. A book stays in a library. A monument stands in a square. A photograph remains in a family. The pioneers are different. Their legacy is leaving the place where memory lives. The farther they travel, the less they can be connected to us, and yet the stronger the symbolic feeling becomes. They matter because they are gone, not erased. Gone outward. It is strategy. It is also poetry. even when engineers do not build it for poetry. A spacecraft is a practical machine, but once it travels far enough, practicality becomes surrounded by meaning. Bolts, antennas, power systems, instruments, and trajectories become part of a story about separation. A working probe is a tool. A silent probe beyond reach is something else. An artifact of longing, reach, and loss. Hope and distance. A journey, a discovery, a message, a fading voice. Somewhere beyond the planets, the objects actually exist. The plaques are not only symbols in a documentary, they are physical plates attached to physical machines. The trajectories are not metaphors. The distance is not imagined. The silence is not dramatic writing. It is the actual absence of signal between Earth and two human-made spacecraft that still move through space. Because sometimes the leaving is the meaning. We do not explore only to bring everything back. We explore to enlarge the boundary of where our traces can exist. Every spacecraft that remains beyond Earth changes the physical footprint of humanity. Most of those footprints are small, fragile, and unlikely to be noticed by anyone else. But they are still real. They mean that the human story is no longer entirely confined to the surface of one planet. The pioneers are among the first footprints of that kind. Not footsteps in dust. They were built to go outward. And outward means goodbye. This is a hard truth because human beings want exploration without loss. We want the picture, the data, the wonder, and the feeling of reaching beyond Earth. But we also want the machines to remain ours in an active way. We want to command them, update them, hear them, and know their condition. For a time, we can. Then, distance teaches the rest of the lesson. The machine becomes less ours by control and more ours by origin. Origin is the final connection. It ends in scale. Despair would say the silence makes the missions meaningless. Scale says the silence is part of what they became. Despair would say nobody hears them, so nothing remains. Scale says meaning can continue as artifact, motion, memory, and possibility. The pioneers are no longer active explorers, but they remain evidence that exploration happened. Hardware became motion. Motion became legacy. It is not a monument people can gather around. It does not shine in the sky. It does not speak in radio anymore. It is quiet, almost invisible, and almost certainly alone. But quiet things can still carry enormous meaning. The universe is mostly quiet. Deep space does not announce itself. Stars burn in silence. Planets move in silence. The pioneers belong to that silence now. But they add something to it. They add intention. Then they became witnesses of another kind, witnesses to humanity's willingness to send something beyond itself. They no longer observe the universe for us, but we can observe them in memory and understand what they represent. They show that the act of sending matters even after the act of receiving ends. It does not end with triumph alone. It does not end with tragedy alone. It ends with acceptance. We built them, they worked. They taught us, they left. We listened as long as we could. Then their voices faded and they continued without us. That is not a clean ending, but space rarely gives clean endings. It gives continuations beyond our reach. That continuation is what makes the pioneers unforgettable. If they had stopped at the end of their missions, they would be important history. Because they kept moving, they became something more. They became symbols of the part of humanity that is willing to release pieces of itself into the unknown. Not because we expect control forever, but because some journeys are worth beginning, even when they cannot be followed to the end. This may be one of the deepest lessons of exploration. Sometimes you launch the instrument, receive the discovery, and lose the voice. Sometimes The object travels farther than your lifetime, farther than your institutions, farther than your language, perhaps farther than your species' memory. And still, the beginning matters. The act matters. The trace matters. The pioneers are traces. A civilization does not have to be certain of being remembered to leave evidence. In fact, maybe the uncertainty is what makes the evidence moving. The plaque is powerful because it may never be read. The spacecraft is powerful because it may never be found. The journey is powerful because it continues without applause, without updates, without an audience. The pioneers are not performing for us anymore. They are simply out there. And that may be the quietest form of legacy. Not a legacy that demands attention, but one that exists whether or not attention remains. The pioneers do not need us to keep believing in them. They do not need their names spoken to remain in motion. They do not need a documentary, a museum, or a mission page to continue outward. Those things matter to human memory, but not to the objects themselves. The objects continue because the universe allows motion to continue. This makes their story humbling. Human meaning and physical reality are not the same thing. The pioneers have meaning because of us, but they exist without us. They were created by human purpose, but now move under laws that do not know purpose. They are symbols in our minds and objects in space at the same time. The two truths overlap, but they are not identical. A spacecraft can be only metal, and also more than metal. It can be silent and still meaningful. It can be dead and still not gone. It can be lost to communication and still part of the human story. It can drift without awareness and still make us feel the enormous distance between what we can build and what we can keep. The pioneers live in that overlap now, not alive as machines, alive only in memory, meaning, and motion. They are among the earliest human artifacts leaving the sun behind. They carry plaques that may never be decoded. They have no power to speak, no ability to turn back, no awareness of what they represent. And yet, when we think of them, the solar system feels different. It feels less like a closed home and more like a place from which something has already departed. That departure changes the story of Earth. For almost all of Earth's history, everything made here stayed here. Life evolved, died, fossilized, and recycled inside one planet's systems. Human tools were made from Earth and returned to Earth. Even our tallest monuments remained under the same sky. But spacecraft changed that. They allowed Earth-made objects to leave the planet, then the inner solar system, then the region of the giant planets, and finally to begin drifting toward interstellar space. The pioneers are part of that irreversible change. Earth is no longer a world that only keeps its artifacts. It is a world that has released some of them. That may sound small compared with the size of the galaxy. 2 silent spacecraft are nothing beside billions of stars. But small does not mean meaningless. A seed is small. A word is small. A first step is small. The pioneers are small in space, but large in meaning because they mark a beginning. They show that humanity has started to become a species whose traces are not limited to its birthplace. Whether we deserve that role is another question. Whether we survive into it is another question. But the first traces are already out there. This is why the final feeling should be calm, not dramatic. The pioneers are not racing toward a known revelation. They are not about to meet aliens. They are not sending secret messages back to Earth. They are not waiting for us in any conscious sense. Their story is quieter and more powerful than that. They are continuing. Continuing is enough. In a universe where so much is temporary, continuation becomes meaningful. The pioneers continue after mission. They continue after signal. They continue after usefulness. They continue after the people who built them. They may continue after the civilizations that remember them have changed beyond recognition. Their motion is not a victory over time, but it is a small persistence inside time. a tiny persistence, moving through a vast dark. That is the image to leave with. Somewhere beyond our reach, Pioneer 10 drifts farther from the sun that once rose over every human who built it. Somewhere else, Pioneer 11 moves along its own path, carrying the memory of Jupiter and Saturn into silence. Neither knows the darkness, neither feels the cold, neither misses Earth. But Earth can miss them, because Earth made them, and maybe that is what makes them lonely. Not their feelings, ours. We feel the loneliness because we understand the separation. We know what it means to send something away and never call it back. We know what it means to leave a message without knowing if anyone will read it. We know what it means to hope that a trace can matter even in a universe too large to promise an answer. The pioneers make that feeling cosmic. They are the lonely spacecraft we left behind forever. Not because we forgot them, but because forever is what space can become when a machine goes far enough. They remind us that exploration is not only about reaching new places, it is about accepting that some of what reaches those places will never return. It is about learning that a goodbye can be built into a trajectory. It is about understanding that a silent machine can still carry the shape of human courage. And perhaps, in the end, that is why humans leave machines behind. Because we are temporary, but we are not content to vanish without reaching. Because our bodies are small, but our questions are not. Because the universe is too large for us, and still we want to touch it. Because even a silent object can say something. Because even a message no one reads can reveal a species that hoped. Because somewhere in the dark, two small spacecraft still carry the fact that Earth once looked outward and decided to send something on ahead. Thank you for watching this calm journey into the lonely spacecraft humanity left behind forever. If you enjoyed this documentary, subscribe for more quiet space stories like this. Leave a like if you want more deep journeys into the mysteries of the universe, and write in the comments where you are watching from. Tonight, you were watching the Space for Sleep channel talking about the lonely spacecraft we left behind forever. Sleep well and keep looking up. Good night.